This is the this is the Gold Hill Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee meeting of December 15th, 2021, being called to order. We have a quorum, though we are waiting on a couple of more members who hopefully will show up. But the meeting is called to order, and we will now have the Pledge of Allegiance. Larry, you're on.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Here I taught school a million years and I had to think about that one. And I used to
All righty, good stuff. So Paige mentioned an agenda adjustment, which involves number 9, which is excavator projects. And the reason for including excavator projects on this list is that we have a new excavator and we have a forest mulcher, and there's some interest in, I know my neighbor Joel, who's the president of Can Do, has become a pretty good operator. So there's and I don't know if insurance wise or whatever, but it may be possible that we could have other people, helping out on projects, and we should discuss that. But given that Clint is here and probably has some good ideas on excavator use in terms of riparian stuff. Why don't we kind of fold those in? Paige, is that?
Yeah, when I looked at the agenda yesterday, I had noticed that excavator was further down. And since we're having our guest speaker presentation from Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District to present the preliminary draft of the wildfire fuels reduction and vegetation management plan, I thought it would be helpful to put the excavator discussion right after he does that while he's still here, in case we have questions that are specific, since they are tied together.
Great. Okay, so we will do that. But also if there's anything in the discussion of the wildfire prevention, that makes sense to talk about it. So let's go straight into that. Clint, you want to, or Paige, do you want to introduce this, or Clint?
Yeah, and I'll also say, hi, Clint, good to see you here. You can't see him, but Larry Holm is here, and you met him when we toured the beach park recently, and there he is. He's with Jerry.
Working on it.
Jerry, so Jerry's left, I guess.
Hey, Clint.
So they're both there, and at this point we are missing Richard Hart, who you have not met, and you have met Rob Lowe at Beach Park, and so hopefully they will attend, but if not, we can send them the recording link and they can catch up. I think all of you have met Clint Nichols before. Clint is with Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District, and I will let him introduce himself, but we're really glad to have him here today to start sharing with us a preliminary plan for how we can create a long-term strategy for managing the vegetation within the park, both for wildfire fuels reduction and for protecting property and infrastructure, as well as for preserving the feel of the park and the park values, ecological and other values. So take it away, Clint.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sound good? Okay, good. So apologies for having two Zoom things. So I'm on my phone with the camera and audio because that has like the best audio. But I wanted to be able to like share my screen and show like the plan and some maps and stuff that I've been working on in a presentation. So that's why so if I'm looking this way, that's because I'm looking at you guys and I'm looking at my screen, but this is my camera. So it's a little confusing, but I'll try and be cognizant of what I'm talking to. So yeah, again, thanks everybody for having me out today. Let me go ahead and bring up this presentation that I put together. Beginning, let's do this, and then let's see. All right, can you guys see? All right, so you guys seeing this this presentation slide?
Yep. If you could
That
make
look
it full
good?
screen on your screen, that would be good.
Maybe. Let's see.
Yep.
Black or unblack?
It should be, it's not the, that one, yeah.
This one here? No, that just turns off the screen.
Okay.
Oh wait, how about if we just do that? There we go. Is
Yeah.
that a little better?
Mhm.
All right, cool. All right, so yeah, so again, thanks to everybody for having me out. Today I'm going to be talking about kind of where we're at with this wildfire fuels reduction and vegetation management plan. So everything I'm going to talk about today is draft only. So none of this is really, you know, ready for sort of official use. There's a lot of recommendations that we can talk about, you know, moving forward until a plan is finalized. But this is really your guys' opportunity to give me feedback and comments or any concerns that you might have that, you know, maybe we might be missing something. So that's why I really wanted to get in front of you guys today and present what I've come up with here so far. So just to like, let me see. So you guys can see this now. What are you guys seeing?
Wildfire fuels reduction and vegetation management plan. It's your first slide that says draft only.
Yeah, okay. That's weird.
Okay, your full screen one's at the bottom. It's the screen. Yeah, well, okay, there we go.
Why is it so weird for me today? All right. Oh, all right, that's better. Okay, good. Okay, so just real quick for the agenda, I don't know why I'm having trouble with this. Normally I'm good with presenting on Zoom. It's like they changed something. It's a little weird today. All right, so just a quick agenda for the meeting today. I want to talk a little bit about who Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District is, just so you guys kind of all know, you know, our history and kind of why I'm involved, why it's important for, you know, why I think it's important to help the city of Gold Hill work on this plan. Talk a little bit about sort of the importance of vegetation management plans in general and why I feel like, you know, why I agree with the city of Gold Hill that a vegetation management plan is necessary and useful to help the city manage these parks. And then we'll dive into the plan itself. We'll talk about sort of the spatial scope of what we're talking about, the layout of the plan itself, and then I'm going to dive into some specific examples of what kind of content you guys are going to find in that plan. And then at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about implementation and funding timelines that I see as helping you guys move with the work here. So, all right, so you guys should all see a picture of like a truck with some people. Okay, good. So real quick, who is Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District? So we are a non-regulatory special district for the state of Oregon. And that's a weird way to say, basically, we're a lot like a fire district or like an irrigation district. We're not technically part of the county, but we're also not technically part of the state. We're a local municipality. And each SWCD, just like any other special district, they're funded in various ways. So like irrigation districts would be paid by their patrons. Fire districts sometimes are all volunteer, but other fire districts might be paid through property taxes or bonds. So we, Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District, we receive a portion of property taxes. So this is my opportunity to thank you all for your paying your property taxes. A very, very small part of that goes to my office and my salary. So this is my opportunity to thank you as taxpayers of Jackson County. So the history of soil and water conservation districts, we actually date back to the Dust Bowl era of the 1930s. So back then, agriculture was essentially mining the topsoil of the Midwest, and it was literally raining on the Capitol steps in Washington, D.C. in these massive windstorms. And so the response to that was a federal and then a local agency that could provide new soil management techniques, things like cover cropping and no-till seeding of crops. And it was a way to get that information out of the land grant schools like Oregon State University, get that information out of those schools and down to the local level to the farmers and ranchers who could benefit from it. And so soil and water conservation districts were that mechanism to get that technical assistance to those agricultural producers in a form that best meets the practitioners in that area. So that's kind of our history, is really about ag and soil and water management. However, in Jackson County, ag is only a small piece of natural resource management in the valley. Obviously, forestry and wildfire is a huge concern and a huge natural resource management topic in the valley. And then the number of people who are living in rural areas but are not producing anything, they're not farming, they're not ranching, they're not managing their woodlands for timber. They're primarily, their goal is mostly for, you know, aesthetics or living, you know, with wildlife, that sort of thing. So we as an SWCD have adjusted the kinds of topics that we advise on to meet those needs of natural resource management from the landowners that we work with. So that's essentially what we do. We provide technical assistance to landowners in Jackson County. We're non-regulatory. We've seen it all, but we don't say anything. So yeah, so that's kind of our role. And specifically myself, I am the forest and riparian resource conservationist for the district. And what that means is that when we decide within internally who is going to work on what types of projects, I work on the forestry projects, and I work on any sort of riparian or streamside forest. So it's basically all about the trees and the shrubs for me. So forestry can be mostly, when I'm dealing with forestry, it's about wildfire and wildfire risk reduction. So I do a lot of fire related projects, fuels reduction projects. And then on the flip side with riparian, I'm focusing a lot on wildlife habitat, you know, either in stream or near stream habitat restoration projects. And the intersection there is fire, and we're going to talk a lot about blackberries and the problem with blackberries from both of those perspectives today. So you can see where I have a degree and where my focus was. And yes, that is me with a shovel. I actually every once in a while do real work out in the field. It's not very often, but occasionally I actually get dirty. So just so you kind of know where I'm coming from with my experience in this arena, maybe why I hopefully feel like I'm qualified to advise you guys on a vegetation management plan. So I've done about 25 riparian and forestry projects since 2014 across Jackson County. That's a lot of different scales. Every one of those projects has had to balance these what are at the surface may seem like conflicting goals between wildfire reduction and wildlife habitat and restoring ecosystem functions. And what I have learned is that they are actually not contradictory. They're actually complementary. A healthy forest is one that can survive low intensity, low severity fire. And it also does a great job at promoting wildlife habitat. And the same thing can be said for riparian areas. You know, if we can go in and manage those things to reduce invasive species, we're going to have a healthy functioning riparian forest as well. So specifically for this project, I feel like the experience that the district has that is really going to benefit the city of Gold Hill is our experience in some of these post-fire projects in the past. So notably the 2020 or the 2018 Penninger Fire. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that one. That one kicked off here in Central Point. It was about 120 acres. 30-ish of that or so was in the riparian area. That was one of the first fires that escaped out of the riparian area and actually threatened homes and businesses. And we really thought that we had people's attention after that fire, and it lasted about 18 months, and then people sort of forgot about it. And then we had the Almeda Drive fire and the South Oban Chain fire, and that obviously has changed a lot of people's perspective about riparian management, especially along Bear Creek. But it's not just Bear Creek that has some of these vegetation problems. So we've assisted in all of these, mostly from a recovery of the riparian vegetation, trying to keep invasive species down after that fire. And then probably the biggest thing that I feel like I've taken away, particularly from the Penninger Fire, is how to balance a lot of these social a lot of these social issues that we're dealing with, particularly along Bear Creek, and I know the city of Gold Hill is dealing with as well. How do you go in and replant a streamside forest in a manner that is both fire resistant, so that the local fire department doesn't get mad at me for planting willows and other trees and shrubs? And how do you replant a riparian area that is going to allow law enforcement to find people who are illegally camping, people who are, doing illegal activities within those areas? And so part of that Penninger Fire recovery was a lot of conversations with these public safety agencies, and how do we find that balance? How do we strike that balance between healthy, functioning riparian ecosystems that still promote public safety? So we do have some history with the city of Gold Hill. We've worked with them in the past. Most of these projects I was not really involved with, so I don't really know too much about them. It looks like the district was working on a rain garden project in the sports park back in 2014. It doesn't look like that project ever was finished, but if it was, you guys can let me know. We helped Hamby Middle School install a bioswale in 2015. And then one of the former conservationists here, Lori, she worked on a restoration conceptual map for Tillamook Falls back in 2015, which I think is on your website. I think I saw that on your website somewhere. We've also done a number of site visits out to the beach park in both 2018 and 2020, talking about vegetation management out there, and the struggles that you guys have been having with the illegal camping and the illegal dumping. So, and then of course now I have a typo there. In 2021, we're starting to work on this vegetation management plan. So, I think it's good to just really talk about why the city needs a vegetation management plan. I mean, it's probably all in all of our heads, but I wanted to make sure that you guys can see what I'm thinking of when I'm putting this plan together. And if there's anything that I'm missing, certainly let me know. But obviously, probably the biggest concern right now to the city is what we saw with the Almeda dry fire in 2020. The park has some similar fuels and some similar potential sources of ignition, and the proximity to residential structures. Both the sports park and the beach park are very close to a lot of residential structures, and that's essentially what we saw in Almeda dry fire, is a fire that started and was running up the riparian areas, and these homes that were built right up against these areas, those were the ones that spread the fire into downtown Phoenix, downtown Talent, and all of that. So there were 3 fire starts within the sports park in 2021. All of those were luckily, tamped down quickly before they spread to anything else. But what that shows is that there clearly is a source of ignition, and there clearly is a fuels. All we need is another very bad weather day, and we could see, something similar to what happened down in Phoenix and Talent. And of course, nobody wants to see that, and that's my primary goal with this project. At the same time, we also want to recognize that the sports park has recreational opportunities and ecosystem function because of its proximity to the Rogue River, which is a critically important salmon habitat stream. So we want to make sure that anything that we do to reduce wildfire risk also is something that's increasing recreational opportunities to the park, making people feel safer at the park, and is maintaining those ecosystem functions. And that's my primary goal, is showing that we can essentially have all of those things with adequate management. And again, I'm going to harp on this pretty much all day today, but all of these concerns are essentially due to the presence of invasive species, particularly Himalayan blackberry. We can talk about the illegal camping, the illegal dumping, and the vandalism, but without the blackberry, all of these things can be reduced. So that's my public enemy number 1. So I'm sorry, was there a question? Did I miss something? No, okay. So real quick, I just want to make sure that we're all understanding what we mean by invasive species. So this is sort of an invasive species 101 lesson. So when we talk about invasive species, we're talking about a non-native species that causes some form of economic, environmental, or harm to human health. And we use the term invasive specifically to talk about aggressive species. If it's a non-native species, but it's not typically aggressive, we'll leave it at non-native. We won't necessarily call it an invasive species. They spread quickly and rapidly. They cause disturbance in any areas they colonize. They cost billions of dollars in economic losses every year. Thinking about, specifically with Himalayan blackberry, think about land lost for agricultural activities. Think about the fires that were spread by blackberry. It's incredibly economically destructive, not even thinking about the social ramifications of invasive species or the ecological ramifications of invasive species. And a good portion of the threatened and endangered species across the country are due to threatened and endangered species are due to the presence of invasive species. And that's, of course, talking about things that are also, animals. So things like invasive fish or other, mammals or reptiles and those sorts of things. But, a good portion of that is really talking about vegetation. And the thing that I want to highlight about invasive species is that it's really all about consistency. I have seen many times, especially with like cities or the county or even the state or the feds will come in and they'll do removal once in like 20 years. They'll come in, they'll take out blackberries or some other vegetation that they're having problems with, and think that that's it, that they're done. And the problem is that invasive species are invasive for a reason. They colonize disturbed areas. And so if you come in, you disturb an area, even if what you're doing with that disturbance is removing that invasive species, without regular maintenance, your costs for future management will actually be higher than that initial entry into these areas. And so that's the real goal of this management plan, is to get a plan together that allows you to be cost effective with your management. And to that end, talking about funds and invasive species. So this is a pretty common, there's lots of different versions of this graph, but it essentially talks about the invasion curve for invasive species. So at the very beginning, when you first have that invasive species, it's actually very economically efficient to try and eradicate that species right when you see it, right when it comes in. As you have more and more area that is occupied by that invasive species, the cost to control it go up, and economic return of that investment becomes less and less and less, because it's just that much more expensive to go in and treat that. So you want to try and get this eradication and containment down to a level that has better economic return for your investment, instead of waiting for it to become completely out of control, and then you're spending anywhere from 5 to 10 times more money to get yourself set back to a place where things are a little bit easier to control. This is typically talking about like a new species across a large region, but I would like to think about it from a very micro region scale. Like if we take one area and we eradicate blackberry from that particular area, say around like the water treatment plant, going back into that area and retreating that area for blackberry on a consistent and regular basis will be much less expensive than waiting 5 to 10 years and re-entering that area with like your excavator or a mower or a crew from Oregon Department of Forestry. So that is my ultimate goal, is to try and help the city of Gold Hill get to a place where their investment in this management is less expensive. So this is a picture actually that I shot from the Penninger Fire while it was going off. It's a really horrible picture because it's from a video, but I was sitting in the Costco parking lot watching the blackberries go up. So the biggest problem with Himalayan blackberry is how it promotes extreme wildfire activity. Again, I can't stress this enough. That was the primary driver, other than the wind, that was the primary driver of the fire, of the Almeda dry fire, was this huge stands of blackberry. But at the same time, it excludes native vegetation. It creates these monocultures that prevents anything else from coming in. And then you have a fire, and once that's gone, nothing else is there to come back except more blackberry. So you lose your recreational areas because of the blackberry over time, and you lose a lot of those ecosystem functions that are critical for riparian areas. All right, so this is actually a picture that I took. This is the bottom of the the hill sort of above the beach park. I mean, it's an ocean of blackberry, and you can kind of see, I mean, it was a wet day that I took this picture, but you can see all of that dead understory there. That is what promotes that severe wildfire activity. So with that, let me just pause real quick and just see if there's any questions. I'll bring up a map. Yeah, any questions yet or any comments? While I chug my coffee and try and recover my breath. All right, so can you guys...
Clint, you might need to maybe show the overview of this as we're looking at it and explain it, but then maybe zoom in and so that we can see a little bit closer once we know what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I've got my my mapping software up too, so we can be a little bit more dynamic with what we look at. So yeah, so you guys can see the map. Okay. So essentially what I tried to do here is to look at the park as a whole and split the park up into management zones that may be best suited for it, both from a wildfire perspective, where do we need to focus fuels reduction, and then also what areas can we take that we can focus on riparian restoration or other sorts of activities, and maybe there's places where there's some middle ground. So I'm basically looking at the entire park that's on the river side of Highway 234. I know the city of Gold Hill, I believe, also owns most of that hillside, but for the most part, I think all that's undeveloped anyways. So we're really just focusing on the sports park and anything that's sort of adjacent to the Rogue River. So I've divided it up, and in the plan, I tackle each one of these management zones separately with specific prescriptions for the different areas. So let me pull up. Can you guys still see the map, but like in a different screen? Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna maybe zoom in. Let me see if I can do, so this is like the upper end of the park. Is that gonna work? That's not gonna work. Let me move that out of the way. All right, let me try this. This might take a second to load. There we go. Okay, so for example, this is sort of that upper end of the park, fairly undisturbed. There's a little bit of invasive species up there, some blackberry, some Scotch broom, but from a vegetation management standpoint, fairly low risk of catastrophic wildfire. There is a lot of vegetation there, and you could maybe get away with doing some pruning and thinning, but again, the native vegetation that is there is actually more resistant to wildfire than the blackberry is there. And if you go in and start clearing a lot of that vegetation, you're just going to encourage more blackberry to come in and create more of a problem. So that area is one of those areas that, in the vegetation management plan, I'm thinking of much less investment in time and energy, because you already have a fairly decent stand of native vegetation that's doing a pretty good job of excluding a lot of those problem weeds. Alternatively, coming down to this beige section here and this orangey red section here, these are areas that are very close to homes and residences and the road, and any fire that was able to escape across here could run up this hillside, potentially, crest over the ridge and make its way down into the city, thinking about spot fires, that sort of thing. So in these areas, the prescription is going to be much different. I'll actually pull these up and be a little bit more specific with what I'm talking about, but things about, very much heavy-handed removal of blackberry or any other invasive species, thinking about pruning, limbing the standing trees that are there, watching for dense shrubs to come in and treating those, again, thinking about it from a wildfire perspective, thinking about canopy spacing, how we space those trees so that if we do have a fire that does torch off one tree, it doesn't spread into another tree and another tree, and now pretty soon we've got homes involved and things are going in a bad way. So you can kind of see I'm trying to divvy up the park in a way that assesses what is there now and what the critical infrastructure is in those areas, and then manage the vegetation based on what the objectives and the concerns are for that area. And my hope is that this will help the city prioritize what areas need to get treated first and how they get treated, and what agencies and organizations will be able to fund the work in those areas. And then scrolling down, we'll talk, I want to get to how am I doing on time, by the way, guys? Are you guys okay? I don't want to take up everybody's time. Not hearing any objections, so I guess I'm okay.
Yeah.
So down here, this is the beach park. And again, what I'm sort of focusing on here is sort of three different areas. One that maintains the beach park as what the community really, enjoys it as. Every time I've been there, I've seen people playing there. So I definitely want to maintain that area as a nice beach park area for the local, kids to play and see the river. The rest of that floodplain area is excellent riparian habitat. That area looks like it seasonally floods. It's got nice little side channels in there. Without the blackberry, that is an area that could be essentially left alone and be used for some really great habitat restoration, good examples of good hiking trail, like walking trails, interpretive trails, really beautiful forest down there once you get past some of the invasive species. But then we talk about that hillside in that picture that I said, and you can see that big red area that I've got delineated out here. That is probably the highest priority for a fuel break, because that whole hillside is just blanketed in blackberry and some other invasive species out there. And the trick here is that, unlike the place up by the sports park, a lot of the land that needs treatment is not even owned by the city. All of those like pinkish tax lots are actually owned by private individuals. And then there's some other places in there that technically aren't even really owned by anything on paper as a tax lot. And so working with those private landowners to coordinate that fuels reduction and allow work to be done on there is going to be critical for the city. And I think don't you guys own one of those houses?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So hopefully you can reach out to your neighbors and get them on board if they're not already on board. So yeah, so again, the prescriptions for each one of these areas may overlap in certain areas, but the idea is that they will be different and specific to the goals of that area. Any questions on the map? Anything that you guys feel like I've forgotten or haven't really looked at? We'll look at the plan next. Okay, not hearing anything. All right, so can you guys see like a Word document now? Does that look good?
Yeah, it's just the title though. There's no text on the.
Yeah. So this is going to be really sparse. I haven't really spruced this up with photos or maps or anything yet. I wanted to get content on here first and layout, and then we'll go back in and we'll pop in some pretty pictures and maps and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's mostly just going to be white paper or white text or text on a white page for a little bit here. So, first page, we'll probably have maybe a good map or maybe a good aerial photo of the park. I think would be a great thing to add here. Table of contents that makes the content easily to accessible. My thought here is to break that. Let me go back to the table of contents here. My thought here for the organization of this is to have an executive summary so that anybody picking this up kind of knows what the point of this document is. Then talking about, and Paige really helped me do this part of it, talking really about what it is, what are the values of the park to the community, and how does that inform what our management goals are. So then after that, I dive into what our specific management goals are, what are the objectives to reaching those goals, and then specific plans for each of the management areas, and how we're going to reach those objectives and eventually use that to reach our goals. And then some of the other sections at the end here, I'm going to try and cover as much as I can some rough costs of different management actions so the city can kind of think about budgeting and weighing these options as they move forward with future years' budgets. I'm going to have a good section in here that talks about potential funding sources and implementation partners, people who are going to hopefully help fund some of the work or get some of the work done for you. And then just some good stuff on like, you know, any literature that I use to develop the plan. That way you guys know what I'm basing my plan on. And then appendices where I'll probably put some specific information about some of the weeds that you guys are dealing with, some other things as well. So I'm not going to spend too much time reading a lot of this. You know, you guys will definitely have an opportunity to look through a lot of this stuff as we go. So, you know, we're working on an executive summary. Again, the park assets and values was really Paige really helped me define these. So of course it's a park. So number one asset really is recreational opportunity, but also it also houses the water infrastructure for the city. It borders residential areas that need to be considered. Then, and of course, there are some excellent ecological values that the park has that we want to maintain as well. So we have 5 management goals. Number 1 goal, reduce wildfire fuels. And I make that the number 1 goal because that goal in and of itself is going to make all of these other goals attainable. So reducing wildfire fuels is the number 1 goal for this plan. Conserving ecological values is our 2nd goal, and that's simply because you do have such a great opportunity with this park that conserving those ecological values will both enhance your recreational value of your park, but it will also reduce those wildfire fuels as well. So manage vegetation long-term. This is a specific goal because I want to get us to a point where we're using this document so the city has a plan in place for managing the vegetation in the park from year to year. Decreasing vandalism and unauthorized camping. Again, that's one of the big things that I think is diminishing the value of the park. And as we do some of these other things, we will get there. So it's a social goal, but I think vegetation management can achieve this goal to some extent. And then, you know, providing a working plan and partners for funders. So one of the things that I've talked to this group about a little bit so far has been, without a plan, it's going to be very hard to find funding for any of the work that you guys want to do. So this document will help unlock the door for future funding and future projects down the road. And that's to me, that's critical. That's the critical goal of this, is to help you guys find funding to get some of this work done. So specific management objectives is eliminating blackberry hedges, implementing a blackberry management protocol, implementing defensible space vegetation management practices in the fire break areas, creating protocols to survey the park annually for invasive species, and then plan and implement native revegetation projects. So let me just take a break and just see how those goals and objectives sound to everybody, if you guys have any thoughts or feedback. I'm really just pausing so I can take another drink.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Cool.
Who was that?
That was Steve.
Oh. It's kind of hard to read it small, but it sounds good so far.
Yeah, and I'll try. Maybe
that's getting better. Yeah, I couldn't really see the objectives.
Okay. And like I said, you guys will get a chance to kind of look this over when I have it in a little bit more of a finished form, so you guys can tell me if I really just want to use this opportunity to make sure I'm going in the right direction here. So this is essentially what the individual management plans for the different areas is going to look like. So let me see if I can carefully bring some of this up. All right, so taking a look at the upriver sports park area and going back to the map, just so you guys are familiar with what I'm talking about, that's this green, the dark green shade up here at the top. So that's that, again, going back, that's sort of that more undeveloped, untouched area of the park. You know, I talk a little bit about, you know, its values, and then I specifically talk about what are the ranks of the management goals for this area. So number 1 for that area, conserve ecological values, then manage vegetation, and then reduce wildfire fuels. We don't really have a huge problem with vandalism up there yet. hopefully that'll stay that way. And then of course, providing a working plan for partners and funders. So I try and rank each of these goals within the area so you can kind of see what the emphasis is in that area. And then I get down to specific actions that the city can take in this area. So in this area, number one, minimize disturbance. Any removal of vegetation is likely going to increase colonization of invasive species, namely blackberry and Scotch broom, because again, it's there, but it doesn't have a good foothold yet. So we want to try and maintain that as much as possible. So the treatment recommendation is a spot treatment of invasive species. So again, and I want to get as specific as I can with when these things are most useful. So in the spring, using hand crews to cut or pull blackberry and Scotch broom, or spot treat with herbicide prior to plant flowering, making sure that the crews dig out root crowns. And then in the fall, treating blackberry with a translocating herbicide to kill root crowns. So, a lot of invasive species management is about timing. If we're going to use herbicide, spring is a great time to control that year's growth. Fall is a great time to kill root sources. Treatment outside of that window, you're kind of just killing more vegetation. I mean, yeah, it does kill, whatever's been growing, but probably the most effective time, especially for blackberry, to really get at the problem is in the fall, because you can you can treat it with an herbicide that gets down into the root crowns and kills it at the source instead of treating the growth after it's come out of the ground. And then we talk about monitoring for new invasive species. I really like the idea of working with the cooperative weed management area. That's a group I believe you guys have worked with in the past, to have them come out and do some of this invasive species surveying. Their knowledge of invasive species and what to look for is vast, and so we should really tap that as much as we can. And then there is a trail there, so you definitely want to think about having a crew out there that is maintaining that trail. Again, it's a great site for a lot of recreational wildlife habitat viewing. Just if somebody wants to get out and walk around in nature for a little bit, that's a great area for that kind of stuff. So you want to have a plan in there so that somebody can go in there and get fallen trees out of the way, make sure people aren't getting slapped with limbs as they come walking through there. So that's that.
Hey, Clint, can I ask a question before we move on?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on poison oak?
So a lot of people like to remove poison oak. It is a native. I don't really consider it an invasive species. It is aggressive, and it can be a problem. So it's when I advise people on managing poison oak, I try and get them to see the value that it might have from a wildlife habitat standpoint. It is a food source when it fruits. And so there is some wildlife habitat benefits to it. So in a place like this, what I would recommend is, keeping it clear and away from the trails itself. So that way, people feel like they can enjoy the trail without bathing in technu when they come back from the trail. But outside of that trail, it has a role, it has a place. I would leave it on the landscape. I have had people that have, taken heroic actions to try and clear their property of poison oak, and it seemed like a lot of effort for not a lot of return on investment. And there's a lot of other parks that have poison oak. Think about like Roxy MP, Table Rocks, even like the Jacksonville Woodlands just outside of Jacksonville. Places are covered in poison oak. But I still use those areas. Those areas are still, pretty popular. So I think, I don't know, to some extent, I feel like poison oak is like we live in Southern Oregon, right? We know that poison oak is going to be out there, and, you just kind of have to plan for it if you happen to rub against the vegetation. But thinking about clearing it from the trail, that's probably a decent investment, but going farther out from the trail in a place like that, probably not a great use of money. I'd rather see you guys.
Well, from what I understanding, it would just encourage more blackberry to come in when we remove it. So
it very well could, yeah. Anytime you're removing any vegetation, you're just creating disturbance that blackberry loves to take advantage of. So then the other area that I want to talk about, because it's a little bit more prescriptive, is the high priority fire break area. And let me go back to the map real quick. That is this orange strip right behind all those houses. And so this is where I get very prescriptive. Again, I rank our management goals. Number one is reducing wildfire fuels. Number two, managing vegetation in the long term, providing working plan for funders, decreasing vandalism and unauthorized camping. And again, in this area, you know, I hate to say it, but conserving ecological values is my least relevant goal here. Of course, we want native vegetation because it has a good role in suppressing invasive species. But if we need to make the decision to not have a shrub layer here because of the risk of wildfire, then that's the play. That's what we should be thinking about. It's really all about thinking about wildfire because of its proximity to homes. We have other places in the park where we can conserve those ecological values, and that's where those are appropriate. But in places like this where there's a risk of fire spreading to homes, then we need to rank that goal a little bit lower. So for the specific prescription, and again, I wanted to be as specific as I could for the city so that there's no confusion about what I'm recommending. You know, eliminating blackberries, a lot of the same recommendations as above, except we can be a little bit more physical here. Like if you've got an excavator that can dig out roots, you're outside of the floodplain here, I believe. So there's not too much of an issue with soil disturbance. But also you can get in there with hand tools and cut it out or dig out the roots, or again, doing that fall treatment of herbicide. I get into talking about pruning trees and what to do with that prune material. I talk about dripline thinning, which is basically thinning out anything out from around species of trees that you want to retain. And then talking about specific species to preserve that are more fire resistant. So ponderosa pine, California black oak, Oregon white oak, riparian species such as cottonwoods. Those are all species that you want to keep because they are more resistant to wildfire. So even if you did have a fire in the park, those species are gonna not spread the fire as much as say like a Pacific madrone might or manzanita or some of the shrub species. And then again, talking about canopy spacing, and then planning for re-entry, because once you do these fuels or treatments, it's not one and done and walk away. You want to think about going back in there at least every 5 years to do some thinning. This might be a good place where prescribed fire could do some of that thinning for you. However, it is right back up against a bunch of homes. And so you're going to probably need to do some good outreach to those homes to let them know why there's going to be fire on the landscape. There's going to be some smoke in the area. You just want to build that social capital before you decide to use a tool like that. And honestly, prescribed fire, in my opinion, that's probably the prescription for the entire park. You're close enough to civilization that prescribed fire needs that social capital before you can get a lot of people buying into it that close to their house. I think a lot of people are a fan of prescribed fire as long as it's on that ridge way over there and not anywhere near their home. So yeah, so things like that I talk a little bit about. And then going back into spot treating invasives and then monitoring for new invasive species. So that's that in a nutshell is what the plan is going to look like. Again, I'm trying to get as prescriptive as possible so that you guys have good guidance, and all of this stuff is coming from published literature from like Southern Oregon University or any other resources. It's and some of it's also based on experience that I've had, but for the most part, that's where the sources of my information are. So any questions on that? I know I'm talking for a long time. I hope I'm not taking up all of your guys' time.
Well, the main purpose of this meeting is this report. So that's
Okay.
the important thing is we give you what you need to keep going with it and just get this process done as quickly as possible. I think we're all in agreement on that.
Cool. I appreciate the time.
So what is it? It seems like you're working away on this, and what do you need from us right now?
So far, what I'm really looking for is how is what I've presented so far, how is that sitting with you guys? Do you feel like I am approaching it the right way? Do you feel like I'm omitting anything? Do you feel like there's anything that's not sitting with you guys well? You know, the things that I've talked about here, it's, you know, we're still sort of at maybe about a 30,000 foot level, maybe we're at like a 10,000 foot level, but if there's anything that like I haven't said today that you feel like needs to be included, that's I guess what I'm looking for today is what's your general feel for the content that I've shared with you guys so far? Am I close to the mark?
I think you've been very clear with it. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's awesome. Everything you've, whatever you've done, drawn from your other plans and your knowledge, I think you're pretty right on, man. And
Cool, I appreciate it.
what's our next steps? You know?
One thing that strikes me is that there, you know, we have community groups, and we could get more help from citizens to do some things, and I just want to make sure that this plan has those, you know, has that built into it, like that the very far upstream part where it's really light management. I mean, that's something maybe we could get a group to adopt, you know, blackberry trimming and stuff like that.
That's a great idea. I like that idea. Sort of adopt your park kind of.
Yeah,
you know.
and so, and where that kind of work is appropriate, and how we can delegate it maybe to a community group, and then the other places where, hey, this is where we need the excavator or whatever it is. I mean, just so that there's some sense of how we can get more of our community to buy into it and understand what, you know, what's happening where and why.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm gonna write that down. You know, I know you guys, the park has hosted some like let's pull it together events in the past. And so continuing that kind of work, I think would be great.
Yeah, that was some of the work with the CWMA, the Cooperative Weed Management Area, but then there was a phase of city history where they didn't really want volunteers in the park. And so CWMA took their activity upriver to BLM land. And so hopefully we can bring them back and we can re-engage some folks, would be great.
Yeah, and there's some turnover at the CWMA as well. So, you know, there's some fresh blood there as well to expand some of the stuff that they've been working on. So.
Okay. All right. Well, let's listen to the rest of the slides and then we'll go back to questions and what's next, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, so I don't have too much left. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some funding opportunities that are either on the horizon or could be on the horizon. So first of all, talking about timeline. So my district has our own grant program, the Conservation Assistance Program. There's sort of two pools of funding that we can draw from. One has a maximum of $10,000, another one has a maximum of $50,000. And that $50,000 is, in this instance, if we were, say, working with neighboring private lands, or if we were working with another grant that was supplying money to the project, then we can qualify for that bigger pot of funds. At this point, I don't have an application before I can't accept an application before the 1st of next July, just because of where our funding is. But once this vegetation management plan is done, we can sit down and take that top priority that maybe doesn't have funding associated with it and put together a plan and an application to meet this application date. And, you know, you could be starting work on whatever that project funds as early as next fall. Our funding is very, I want to say it's very fluid in how and what kind of things it can fund. So again, you know, principally the park looks at, you know, our goals, of course, are sort of fuels reduction, but also some restoration as well. But if the city had some other ideas that were natural resource management related, say like stormwater management, maybe like the outfall for the water treatment plant, those are all things that we could also explore helping the city with funding as well. We probably have the most fluid funding categories that I'll talk about today. So the Oregon Department of Forestry, again, work with Herb Johnson with anything that I talk about. He'll have much more information on. But so there's some Senate Bill 762 funding that's coming down the road that I know Herb is applying for. You know, that might be an opportunity that for you guys to work with Herb and get some of that funding and do some more work, you know, even this fall, or not this fall, sorry, this winter, or even next year.
Can I interject and say, everyone, Herb was our contact for the $10,000 that they gave us last spring, if you remember that. So he's familiar with the project, but also I think we'll really appreciate a plan, because it was pretty arbitrary, just saying, let's start here last year. So I think he would be really willing to come back and follow up and continue with the work.
Yeah, Herb's a good guy, and his crew, what I have listed here, that seasonal brush crew, they do some excellent work. And so having them is a huge resource. Not every county has a crew that can do that kind of work. So they may have some crew time this winter, but again, work with Herb to get the specifics on that. So I believe you guys are working with Ian Kassab in Fire District 3 on the Firewise program. Definitely want to encourage you guys to continue to do that. However, you know, Ian would direct you guys to. Traditionally, Firewise has always been more of an education and a community building, sorry, another typo, a community building program. The idea is to build communities that essentially take care of these fire risks themselves. But then if there are resources in the area, then those Firewise communities can receive support, like from the Oregon Department of Forestry brush crew. They come in, they remove any invasive or any, like, you know, fire prone vegetation, that sort of thing. However, Senate Bill 762 specifically has money for current Firewise communities. And so my hope is that future wildfire mitigation funding down the road can go to Firewise communities to get some of this work done. Now, it won't help. I don't think it'll help you guys out now, because you guys I don't think you have a Firewise designation yet. Is that true? That true statement? I don't think you guys have a Firewise. Yeah. So I don't think it'll help you this year, but definitely go through the process and try and get as much of the community involved in that, because there could very well be some future funding opportunities. You want to line yourself up to maximize those opportunities. And then the last one I'll talk about is the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. So they have two programs. They have a small grant program that has a maximum of $15,000, and it's regionally competitive. So it's sort of the Southwest Oregon region is who you'd be competing against. And then there's an open solicitation that essentially doesn't have a max, but it's statewide competitive. So the projects that go to the open solicitation are huge projects. They're like, you know, fish passage barrier removal projects, you know, big, you know, multi-million-dollar projects, or projects that, you know, treat lots of acres or lots of stream miles, that sort of thing. So depending on what the city wants to do, there's a couple of opportunities. The application dates vary from year to year. I can certainly help you guys work with that. There's also the Valleys of the Rogue State Park, Valleys of the Rogue Watershed Council. They're a newly formed watershed council. And I've reached out and I've talked to them a little bit about how I'm working with the city to develop this vegetation management plan. And so I think they have some interest in you know, helping guide the city. They are specifically about restoration. So if it benefits the watershed, then that's what they're going to look for to decide whether or not they'll fund a project. So they're much less interested in fuels reduction, unless we can say that fuels reduction is part of our restoration effort. And again, I think it is. Yeah, Paige.
So the Valleys of the Rogue Watershed Council, you know, they've newly formed. They replaced the Seven Basins Watershed Council. And I walk a lot in Valleys of the Rogue State Park, and I'm not sure who's funding it. It must have some state something, because it's a state park. But they have a bunch of signage up all along the trails right now that say, expect heavy equipment and herbicide spray. We're doing a restoration project. And the other day I was at a meeting and I heard directly from the Valleys of the Rogue, there's hundreds of new trees and shrubs planted, and where they've been taking out the blackberries. And Valleys of the Rogue got out there and did a lot of the labor. So that might be like what Steve was suggesting, having some volunteers, that might be some low-hanging fruit to find.
Yeah, they're a
Helping
great
hand.
partnership. Yeah, they're a great partnership, not only to tap these Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board funds. I can too, but sometimes the capacity is harder for me to get that. So they might be able to help with that. And then just the volunteer labor pool that they're sometimes able to pull is very useful as well. So,
Yeah.
so both the Watershed Enhancement Board and the Valleys of the Rogue Watershed Council will be listed in the plan as potential partners for future work. But it's definitely something that's probably a little bit more down the road. Again, it has that restoration focus, and so we would really need to think about, you know, a specific project we have in mind to do that work. So, so that's all my contact information. These days, you're probably easier to get a hold of me on my cell than my office number. So if you want to jot that down, so if you have any questions, you can shoot me either an email, a phone call, or even a text message. That's how you can get a hold of me. So yeah, so I'll just pause there and see if there's any questions and comments. So just coming back, I guess, really to the question about excavator use, since we were talking a little bit about that. If there's a desire from the city to put some miles on that machine this winter, you know, the areas that I would think about would be going the re-entry into the fuel break that was created last spring with the ODF crew, getting back in there, treating any regrowth to blackberry manually, you know, whether it's trying to dig out the roots or whether it's just putting like a flail mower blade on it and cutting the material down. That area is fairly flat and fairly easy to access, so that's a great area, and you're not really in danger of taking out a lot of native vegetation. That area is always going to be an area that's probably going to need a lot of maintenance activities to get in and redo that blackberry control. So that's an area. The other area you might consider doing that kind of work might be down by the beach park, but back on the hillside. I have some reservations with the work down there because first of all, I don't know how you'd even get it down there. I guess maybe you could come down that path. But also the soils are really sandy down there. And so, you know, depending on how big and heavy that thing is, you might have some trouble getting stuck down there. If you guys do something down there, what I would recommend, well, now I need to think about that for a second. Let me think about that. Yeah. That's in the 100-year floodplain. So one of the things that I actually, one of the landowners that I got their hands slapped. So they came in. So by the way, this is another map that I made. This shows the floodplain overlay. So the floodway, the 100-year and the 500-year floodplain. And so one of my previous landowners actually got their hands slapped for. They had a crew come in with an excavator with a flail mower attachment at the head of their excavator, and they mowed down a bunch of blackberries, and then they left that material on the side of the bank. And they kind of did that at my recommendation, because I like to, if they're going to do that work before winter, and you've got all that rain, or like today we got snow hitting that bare soil, then you're going to start seeing erosion and you're going to cause some problems. But Oregon Department of Environmental Quality apparently doesn't like that, because what happens is that woody material gets flushed down into the stream and can cause some issues that way. So if you do some work on that hillside with the excavator, plan to pile and burn that material, and then think about doing some like some seeding or something like that to try and get some vegetation reestablished. And you might think about doing it maybe late January or into February, because that's typically, we have a little bit less precipitation later in the winter. I say typically, there's no normal anymore in the valley, I swear. Like, when's the last time we had snow in December? So, you know, typically we have a little bit less precipitation, you know, later in winter. So just thinking about, like, you know, if you're going to go in, especially with any sort of equipment that's going to do some serious soil disturbance, you know, think about what that area is going to look like once you're done. Think about reseeding. If it's a flat area, like, again, that area behind all those homes in the sports park itself, if you're going to go in, you might just think about mulching that material and leaving it there. It's not going to wash into the river. That'll be good ground cover. Leave it on the ground, let it decompose, and you're not going to get a lot of erosion. So that's my biggest concern with the big excavator type work, is just kind of the soil damage that can result from the use. It's a great tool. It's like anything, it's got its place. So
Clint, in the interest of time, I'm wondering what your timeline is on for kind of having a final plan that we can share around and be like, hey, ODF, come back in January of 2022. Like, where are we on just getting that down? And then I guess when Jerry comes back, we'll ask him like what we need to do as far as getting this in front of city council and like getting it on a city council meeting, like if that needs to happen, and if so, when we could, like, I'm not even sure how often city council meets, like what the expectation would be for that kind of thing.
yeah, so I'm hoping to have everything sort of wrapped up in a good draft for your guys' review by the end of the year. The holidays tend to be quieter. I don't get a lot of site visit requests or field work. So I'm going to have a lot of time in the office to kind of just sit down and hammer this out for you guys. So my goal is to have it done by the end of the year. And so then, it could be before either the Parks Committee, or it could be before the City Council, sometime in January for, a review. And if there's any feedback on changes that you guys want to make, I can make those changes pretty quickly and then, be ready pretty quickly.
So crew, should we try and look at the final at our January meeting, which is, I'm not sure what date, and then try and get it on assuming that we want to go forward with it, if there's any changes or whatever, final changes, that Clint can make them. But if we make a recommendation to the city council, Jerry, is it realistic to get it on an agenda in January?
Yeah, we have the opportunity to have a council meeting twice a month, the first and third Monday. I know that there will be months, for instance, December, we only have one meeting this month. We've had it. And January so far, I've got quite a few items for the first meeting in January. If we want to do it after the Parks Committee meets, we are December 15th, so I'm thinking that, what is this, the third Wednesday? Is that when this
We've
meeting?
usually done the first or second. This year we went out. I mean, this time we went out later because we needed to get Clint here, and Steve was out of town last week. So I don't know if that would be the second is the 12th, which is still
Okay.
like a month away.
And if that's the case, then we could have the meeting either the third Monday in January or the first meeting in February. So you're only talking a 2-week difference between the January meeting and the February meeting. I don't know if this committee wants to have some time to absorb the plan, meet with Clint for any edits or comments, and maybe it's safer to do it the first meeting in February. And it would be good for the council to adopt the plan. And I think that would show potential funders that the council has bought into the plan and is willing to abide by it.
Okay. Could we, I'm just trying to think through, if Clint says he's finishing this by the end of the year, that's 2 weeks. And then we would have, Steve and Larry chime in if you prefer to meet on the 5th or 12th. I think we had originally started meeting the 1st January, but it's jumped the first Wednesday of the month, but it's jumped around. Anyway, we would have some time if he finished it around the end of the year and then we met on the 12th, we would all have some time to review it and maybe email him any questions that he could ask, that we could ask him or he could answer on the 12th. And then looks like the 3rd, if we wanted to act fast, I guess that would be the January the 17th for the city council. Is that right? Oh, I'm looking at 2022. How did I get on 2022?
That's correct.
It is 2022. It is 20. It is going to be 2022.
Can you email?
Can we what?
The thing, email us the report as soon as it's done, and so we can read it in advance of the meeting. So 'Cause I mean, I'd love to read it whenever it's ready to be read, so.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Now, I think that presented to council on the 17th, my only concern is that's a little aggressive for us to get it ready for the council meeting, because I'll have to do a staff report. We'll have to get it prepared on the agenda. So
Okay,
you're only giving me a day
Yeah.
really to put that together, because agendas we like
I
to
see.
send out on Thursday or
Okay.
Friday. So
okay,
if February 7th, that's a very safe date, that gives everybody time to digest it. And that gives us time here for staff to get it on the agenda.
that sounds
So-
good. Does that
And
sound
that
good to you,
gives-
Clint?
That
Yeah.
gives Clint some wiggle room as well. So, he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel pressure to get it to you guys by January 12th.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. And then the city council probably won't be able to have as much time for a presentation. Clint is has indicated to me that he's available to present it to them. It would need to be obviously a shorter version. But could we send them the link of this meeting in advance and they can review it if they like, so that they can have a little bit more background information, or does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's great. And also we'll send out the plan with the staff report. So they'll have the weekend to review the actual, the finished plan prior to that February meeting. And then, yeah,
Okay.
I'd love to have Clint, if you're available on the 7th, to do a quick presentation and basically just give a real quick synopsis of how this came about, why we're doing it, and the steps we've taken, not only staff, but the Parks Committee, and we're meeting next week with the fire department, just to let the council know that everybody's on board with this. So we don't have conflicting ideas when it comes to the management of the vegetation.
Yeah, so I'm looking at my calendar. The 7th, there's a chance I might be at a training, but it's in the evening, right?
Yeah, and we also have that we're gonna do a hybrid meeting, so you could attend remotely as well.
Yeah, I might have to do that. I'm not totally certain I'm gonna go to this because it's like the first in-person conference that I've been to since the whole pandemic thing. So there's a good chance it'll even cancel. All the other ones have. So, but yeah, if I have some
Their
virtual
meetings
access,
are our council meetings are in the evening, if that's helpful.
yeah. So I could just remote in from wherever I'm at. So
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
and I promise I won't be as long-winded.
That was, well, I think for all of us to have the background information is helpful. I really appreciate all the time that you put into being especially thorough, so that we have a good understanding of where this came from and where it's going. I'm excited to look at it close up and kind of see, what all's there. So whenever we have that, it's wonderful, and we'll look forward to it.
Yeah, so so for me, I'm gonna have, my deadline is gonna be, I'm gonna have this draft. I'm gonna plan to send this out to the committee by the 31st of December. That way you guys have plenty of time to look at it. You guys can respond, via email if you have any questions or comments on it, but we can also meet on the 12th at the committee meeting for any more formal changes that you're gonna want to make. And that'll give us plenty of time to have it really feel like it's buttoned up before we present it to the city council. So.
Cool.
That sounds really good. One thing, if there are any, like if January, February is a time that we should do something, if you could break that out as a separate item that we could maybe just get that moving in advance, let's not lose the window of opportunity.
We don't need a vegetation management plan to do work in January and February if we got ODF funding or something like that. In other words, like we can still start pursuing things with a draft plan, could we not?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think now is a great time to start working with her, get something lined up for January and February. I tend to recommend to not doing any major vegetation removal work past February because that's bird nesting season. And although blackberry is not the best habitat for birds, they still do use it. So try and plan for that. January, February is a great window to do some of that work. So yeah, I'd be reaching out to Herb. You can even, depending on, if he needs to see kind of what the overall plan is, I can share with him what we've got so far for the vegetation management plan. But if all you're doing is killing blackberry, I would say have at. So
Cool.
Can you coordinate that with Clint and Herb and sort of see how that works?
Yeah, I did you say Paige?
Yeah.
I missed it. Yeah, I'm happy. I can send an email to Clinton, Herb, and Jerry and get him going.
yeah, and the other thing too,
quickly, but we'll nudge him if he doesn't reply quickly.
Yeah, and just the other thing, just so I can put it out there, I think we're past the window for successful herbicide treatment. So we're mostly, I think, in the realm of maybe February you can start doing some of that if we have a good regrowth. But again, that herbicide is just treating that year's growth. So if you've got access to mechanical means, that might be a more effective use of your time. So, but yeah, I have another project where my contractors are basically like, yeah, I don't know that we're going to get another spray session in. So I think we've passed that window, especially now with the weather so cold as it has been. So
Clint, before you go, are you or who could be available if there's a contractor that comes out, or to talk with staff if that's needed, to kind of answer questions or convey, like you mentioned, sometimes it's best to mulch and sometimes it's best to leave on the ground, and just kind of help understand where the best areas are for that. Do you do that directly? Do you kind of mentor at all? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if there's questions, I've done that in the past where, like, if there's been questions from the contractor about, like, okay, specifically, what do you want to do here? Like, if it's unclear, like from the landowner, I'll come out and I'll walk the ground with the contractor and talk to them about it. The only catch on that whole thing is, as a public agency, I can't tell you what contractor to use. I can recommend ODF because it's another public agency, but I can't say, like, for example, go use Loma Katsi, right? I mean, they're great at what they do, but I need you guys to make that decision, not me.
Yep.
So
yeah, no, ODF hired a contractor directly last time, but it would have been great. We didn't have a plan. We didn't really have a map. So it was just like, all right, we're going to do from here to here. And there wasn't, I think, between us telling ODF and when ODF hired the contractor, I don't think there was a whole ton of communication on what specifically was supposed to be happening there, other than to get the blackberries out. So getting a little more specific would be good.
Yeah, and it does look good. Now it's the time for maintenance. So
All right, we got to move on. So we got to end this meeting.
Sorry.
And thank you so much. That was really helpful, and look forward to working with you more. And
yeah,
just
appreciate it.
I'm
Appreciate
sure.
it, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenn.
You will.
So yeah, we have a bunch of things that I think mostly we can just wait on. The skate park maintenance. There was a question about who was doing the work, and the contractor that Can-Do talked to has built skate parks for 8 years or something. I mean, he's the right guy. So weather permitting, we should have them go at it.
I can give 2 quick updates on Graffiti and Brownfield if you'd like.
Okay.
But actually, I think most of y'all are already familiar with the Graffiti situation, but just in case anybody watches this or is listening, it doesn't look like they are, but we postponed the date that we were going to do on December 11th because the weather was supposed to be really nasty. It ended up being not so nasty during that morning, but it wouldn't have been a good idea to paint because it rained heavily that afternoon. But over the course of since our last meeting, we have like 5 to 7 volunteers who are interested in coming out and helping. We are planning to get in there and we have colors of paint. Tony has put an area in the bathroom closet, and we're going to be able to access the key and get the equipment. So we will paint some of the areas. We also are going to, there was an idea when we did the walkthrough of the park to use a angle grinder. And we have Joel, the chair of Can-Do, has I think 3 of them. and we have one here at my home that we're going to loan out. And one of them's battery powered, but we'll get a couple of generators, and we will attempt to sand off all the graffiti on all the boulders along the way. There's probably 10 or 12 boulders that have been tagged, maybe more. And I also picked up some biodegradable, supposed to be really good chemical remover that's specifically for rocks. We have a gallon of that we can try out and leave with the city to have available there. So how we left it when we canceled it was to look at having it potentially the 29th, which is a weekday, but I'll be off work that day, or the 8th of Saturday. The volunteers that are available have very flexible schedules for around work and whatever. So they were all fine with doing it on a weekday. And what we are how we left it is, if we do it on the 29th in the morning, like 9 to 1, like we were going to do the other one, we will look ahead at the weather forecast. And if we need to do it on the 27th or 28th because the weather's going to be better, it sounded like this group is raring to go whatever day we do it. So that's happening. Any questions or thoughts?
That's awesome.
It's cool. While you're on the switching stuff, we switched the daylight and donuts to the IOF hall. It was going to be outdoors, but the weather to play it safe. So the whole community's invited, of course, trying to get all this bonding going. So I won't be there. My wife will for sure. I might be there late. I got a MRI on Saturday because so many COVID people are taking over the hospitals. But anyway, so, but
Okay.
that's been switched. And also, you already know the music and everything that couldn't be done.
Yeah, that was the same day as the graffiti cleanup. I saw that the music thing was canceled. So that's unfortunate.
Cool. And yeah, it's terrible, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should I go on Brownfield real quick?
Okay, sure.
So the last meeting, we talked kind of higher level around the Brownfield program, and the woman that's with Karen Homolak, who's the state Brownfield specialist with Business Oregon. We met with her, Jerry and I met with her and Malia on December 7th. And we took a deeper dive into the funding that's available with the state funded Brownfield Redevelopment Fund, which it's a lottery backed grant revolving loan fund. There's 2 grants. The technical assistance grant is up to 60,000, and that will help with technical assistance for figuring out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and potentially some cleanup dollars. There's also an integrated planning grant for 25,000 that covers conceptual design, can help analyze structural integrity, and will it meet safety requirements, those kind of questions. For those, a Gold Hill match component would need to be 10%, and it could be in kind if needed. The federally funded Brownfield cleanup funds are for cleanup if it's greater than $60,000. It's also a revolving loan fund, and it goes up to $200,000, and that's only for cleanup. It's a little bit more challenging because you need to jump through some, paperwork with a different National Historic Preservation Act and labor standards and endangered species, but the loan structuring is very flexible, she says. Moving forward, Karen gave a few recommendations, doing a hazardous building material survey, which would be done by a contractor that Gold Hill would hire out. And she made a few recommendations on who we could reach out to on that, or not recommendations. She named some possibilities and highlighted that we would need to follow state and city procurement rules. So the hazardous building material survey is kind of one of the first things that we need to do, and the TA grant could fund that. And that's so we can really determine we need to know what's there so we can know what we are able to do with the building. We'll need to next kind of determine our intention and define whether it's salvageable, what the scope of work it would be. And both of these would be tied in with applying for the TA grants and the integrated planning grants. She's going to send some applications. Jerry, have you gotten those from her yet?
No.
Okay, I will send an email to her and ask her for those applications, because Jerry and I are having a follow-up meeting to kind of discuss what she had, this download of information that she gave us, and see how we'll take steps on the applications. But apparently it's a pretty quick turnaround time, 1 to 4 weeks for staff approval, for us to get awarded money to start moving forward. And then she also recommends that we reach out to the DEQ. 2 contacts, Kate Jackson and Mary Camarada. You might have had some work with Mary Camarada before, right, Steve? Or you worked with her?
Well, actually, Kate Jackson, yeah.
Both of them?
Yeah, Kate, I know better. Yeah.
I know Kate better too. I don't know Mary. I've known Kate for a long time, but I think Kate's up in Salem, and she's the regional DEQ person, but Kate's our local regional solutions team connection with DEQ. So anyway, she was encouraging that we ask DEQ to do further investigation. It's no charge to the city. And it would be kind of finding out if our ideas for intended reuse are within their standards, if there's any information gaps on that EPA assessment that we already have, or any red flags in that report, what else needs to be done, and does zoning match any intended uses that we come up with. So there's a few steps to keep moving forward, but basically it's applying for the TA and the integrated planning grants. And then, you know, if we do that, we're going to need to put our heads together as the Parks Committee and start thinking about what we envision this to be, like what it could be. We can't put the cart too far ahead of the horse until we know what materials are in the building that need to be dealt with and what will be left with afterwards. But, you know, we can kind of do them simultaneously so we can start moving forward on it. That's a real crash course, but that's all I got.
That's awesome. Okay. So what's your next step on this?
Getting the, well, we need to find out if Jerry's wanting to move forward, and then applying for a TA grant would be the first step. Another first step would be reaching out to the DEQ and asking them to take a look at the EPA report, and just asking them for guidance on anything that we're missing that we need to know, you know, any red flags, so that we don't get too far out and they're like, nah, nope, step back a bit. So and then the other thing is, and all these can kind of happen simultaneously, but it is if we get TA funding, which there's pretty much no chance that we won't get it.
Mhm.
When we apply and get TA funding, if we decide to do that, using that money to get a hazardous building material survey, which would be Gold Hill hiring a contractor with those dollars through an RFP process.
Okay. Good.
Cool.
Yeah,
Alrighty.
it's very cool. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Be like a dream come true.
Moving along, Jerry, what's happened with with that grant money the city received? Is that all called for now, or all spoken for? Or?
No, it's heck, I think more than half of it is still available. You know, we got approved for expenditures for basically equipment, but there's still about half of it that's available for, you know, it's still up for debate. And it sounded to I haven't received any further direction from the council, but there still is money available for transportation related projects.
One thing that comes to mind, you know, realize my own pet project for all these years, we had $20,000 that was supposed to come from Travel Southern Oregon to basically write the permits for the Whitewater Park, and all that disappeared because of COVID.
Oh.
And anyway, that's a project that has been approved by the city, as you know, I mean, has been supported by the city. In fact, the city paid for the first mapping of the river. And so maybe this would be you know, maybe that would be a good use for some of that money, since it hasn't been spoken for, to actually just move the Whitewater Park along. Once we get through the permits, I think the state will fund it. That's pretty much what we've been told. It's
Right.
just getting the damn permits written.
Sure. I can write it down. What I'm doing is, as people have suggestions, I add them to the list, and I leave it to the budget committee and the council as far as designating what projects or items get what funding. And I try to leave names off. I've learned so far in Gold Hill that it's best to not attach items with names and just leave it.
Yeah.
I just have a list. That way personalities don't get involved.
Learning fast, Jerry.
War zone.
It's not my first rodeo.
Nobody would ever connect the Whitewater Park to me, so
Nah, they won't ever even think that, Steve.
You're a wild man.
anyway, so, well, I'll send you the proposal that was done a couple of years ago from the guy who wrote he's the guy who wrote the environmental assessment, and he was going to do the permits and see if, so I'll throw that into the hat, if that's okay with everybody.
All right, where are we at?
If we could get the link to this meeting and share it with Rob and Richard, that would be great. I'd love for them to get caught up.
You got it.
Let's see. Anything else? I think we actually covered everything. So good stuff.
Yeah, so our next meeting is the 12th, January 12th from 3 to 4:30.
Yeah. And yeah, so the ideal scenario is we get this report in advance and we all read it so we can go pretty quickly. Just see if
that sounds like the plan. Yep. It looks like he's gonna have it to us by the 31st, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
And if we can get Richard and Rob to read it as well, then yeah, that would be a huge step forward, and we can get that to the city council. And
I think it's great. I think the plan that Clint's working on, it just establishes boundaries and guidelines. And I like to have something to refer to. So if there are any concerns, we can say, look, the plan is being completed by a reputable entity. It's not my plan. It's not, someone else's. It's legit.
It's an experienced public entity. It's an experienced public entity that's actually funded partially by Gold Hill. So it works out well.
yeah, and also, and it'll mean that we can get this funded. So
that's what Lamakatsi said when they came out. They were like, "Yeah, we'd love to be involved. Where's your plan?"
Yeah, we'll have it now. I think it's great. And I'm glad we included the beach.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I think that was a wise thing to do. Just knock it all out.
Yeah, that was a good addition, and that came out of our last parks meeting, y'all. So good job.
I know one landowner at Beach Park who is more than happy to work on in conjunction with the city on this.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we've never had a group this smooth where everybody is working together very well, ever.
Yeah, Almeda Fire has really highlighted the threat of the blackberries, and I think across Southern Oregon, people are more willing to do work on the blackberries. I got out there and pulled and dug out massive blackberries on the land adjacent behind my house, between my house and the railroad track last year. It's a threat to me, and it's on the easement, but we spent weekend after weekend pulling it out just to kind of get that fire danger down. And I might not have done that if it hadn't been for Almeda Fire. So,
Yeah.
That's why God made herbicides.
used at the right time in the right place
okay, all
with the
right.
right safety equipment.
I've tried it every season, and the fall's the one, man, when it's going back into the ground.
All right, guys. Well,
Hey,
I
everybody.
gotta run, but it's a great meeting. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
Thanks, everyone.
yeah,
thanks, guys.
All right.
Maybe we'll see you at the graffiti day. I'll keep you looped in on graffiti day.
good. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll see you Monday, Paige.
Okay. See you Monday.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Bye.